The heavy wooden grandfather clock in the hallway had ticked without fail for 62 years. Its heavy brass pendulum kept perfect time, never losing a single second, serving as the steady heartbeat of the old house. But on a crisp, freezing November evening, with the wind howling a mournful tune through the valley, the rhythmic ticking abruptly stopped. The ornate brass hands froze precisely at 14 minutes past 11. And at that exact moment, Grandma Clara, the beloved eccentric heart and soul of our little village, vanished into thin air from inside her locked study. The windows were fastened tightly from the inside. The heavy oak door was bolted shut. She was simply gone. Welcome, my dear friends, to another evening by the fire. Pull up a comfortable chair and wrap a warm blanket around your shoulders. If you enjoy stories that warm the heart and leave you with a valuable lesson, subscribe to Nanny Granny's Golden Tales and become part of our storytelling family. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading every comment. Now, let us return to the baffling mystery of Grandma Clara. To truly understand the profound silence of that stopped clock, you must first understand the boy she left behind, her grandson, young Arthur. Arthur was 17 years old, a quiet, observant boy with deep brown eyes that noticed everything but gave away very little of his own heart. He had lived with his grandmother since he was just a small child, ever since his own parents had passed away in a terrible winter storm. For over a decade, Clara was his entire world, his anchor in a vast and unpredictable ocean. Clara was the village clockmaker. She was a master of tiny gears, coiled springs, and the delicate art of measuring time itself. Her workshop was a magical sanctuary, smelling constantly of brass polish, machine oil, and the sweet peppermint candies she kept in her apron pockets. Arthur had grown up surrounded by the soothing chorus of 100 clocks ticking, chiming, and cuckooing in perfect harmony. But of all the clocks, the towering grandfather clock in the central hallway was Clara's masterpiece. She had built it by hand the year Arthur was born. She always told him that as long as that clock ticked, her love was watching over the house. Then came that terrible November night. Arthur had been reading in the parlor when he realized the house had grown uncomfortably quiet. The underlying heartbeat of the grandfather clock was missing. He walked into the hallway and saw the motionless pendulum. The time read exactly 11:14. A chill ran down his spine. He called out for his grandmother, but only the hollow echo of his own voice replied. He rushed to the door of her study, her favorite room in the house. It was locked from the inside. Panic rising in his chest, Arthur threw his shoulder against the heavy oak wood, finally splintering the doorframe and bursting inside. The room was empty. The fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing embers. Clara's favorite shawl was draped over her rocking chair, and a cup of chamomile tea sat half-finished on her desk, still gently steaming. The windows were latched securely from the inside. There were no secret doors, no hidden passages. The police arrived shortly after, scratching their heads in absolute bewilderment. They searched the house, the gardens, the surrounding woods, but found absolutely nothing. It was as if the universe had simply erased her at the precise moment the clock stopped ticking. Days turned into weeks, and the village fell into a deep mourning. The bustling clock shop remained closed. Arthur wandered through the silent house like a ghost, his heart heavy with an unbearable weight. He felt utterly abandoned. Why would she leave him without a word? Why the locked room? And why did the clock stop? He spent hours sitting on the hallway floor, staring up at the frozen face of the grandfather clock, desperate for it to tell him the secret it was keeping. Late one evening, exactly 1 month after her disappearance, a massive winter storm struck the village. The wind rattled the window panes, and lightning illuminated the dark hallway. In the sudden flash of light, Arthur noticed something peculiar. The intricate wooden carving at the base of the grandfather clock cast a strange, uneven shadow. He crawled closer, running his fingers along the dusty oak panels. He pressed against a small, raised carving of a rose. To his absolute astonishment, there was a sharp click. A hidden drawer, seamlessly blended into the woodwork, popped open. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. With trembling hands, he reached inside and pulled out a small, beautifully polished mahogany box. Resting on top of the box was a folded piece of parchment paper. He recognized the elegant, sweeping handwriting immediately. It was Clara's. "My dearest Arthur," the letter began, "if you have found this, it means the clock has stopped, and I am no longer sitting by the fire with you. Do not let fear consume your heart. Time only stops for those who refuse to move forward. I have not abandoned you, my sweet boy, but before you can understand where I have gone and why I had to leave the way I did, you must learn to fix what is broken in the present. Inside this box are 3 broken watches. They belong to people in our village whose time has become stuck, just like ours. Help them, Arthur. Only when their time moves forward again will you find the key to unlock the final truth." Arthur slowly opened the mahogany box. Lying on a bed of crimson velvet were 3 tarnished, broken silver pocket watches. Attached to each watch was a small tag bearing a name. The first tag read Eleanor. The second tag read Thomas. The third tag read Mr. Abernathy. Arthur realized he wasn't just looking at broken machinery. He was looking at a map left by his grandmother. A map that required him to step out of his silent house and into the lives of others. The very next morning, Arthur bundled up in his thickest wool coat and stepped out into the freezing, snow-covered village. The air was crisp and biting. His first destination was the village bakery, run by a kind but weary woman named Eleanor. When Arthur pushed open the door, the bell jingled brightly, and the overwhelming, comforting aroma of fresh bread and cinnamon rolled over him. Eleanor was wiping down the counter. When she looked up and saw Arthur, her eyes widened with a mix of sympathy and surprise. "Arthur," she breathed softly. "Oh, you poor dear. Come in by the oven. Let me get you something warm." Arthur shook his head politely and approached the counter. He reached into his pocket and placed the first broken watch gently onto the glass display case. "Grandma Clara left this for you," he said quietly. "It's broken. She asked me to fix it." Eleanor stared at the watch, her hands flying to her mouth. Tears instantly sprang to her eyes. "Oh, my heavens," she whispered. "I haven't seen this in 20 years." She looked at Arthur, her voice trembling. "Did she tell you the story of this watch, Arthur?" Arthur shook his head. 20 years ago," Eleanor began, her gaze lost in the tarnished silver casing, "my husband passed away very suddenly. We had just opened this bakery together. When he died, my world completely shattered. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't bake. I was going to let the bank take the shop. I wanted time to just stop entirely. She wiped a tear from her cheek with her flour-dusted apron. One rainy evening, your grandmother came to my house. She didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, she brought me this watch. She had deliberately removed the mainspring so the hands wouldn't move. Eleanor looked deeply into Arthur's eyes. Clara told me, "Eleanor, you can choose to stay in this moment forever, like this broken watch. But if you do, you deny the world the sweetness you still have left to give." She told me to keep the watch as a reminder until I was ready to let time move forward again. It took a year, but I finally reopened the bakery. I returned the watch to Clara, asking her to fix it, but I suppose she kept it broken, waiting for a time when someone else might need its lesson. Arthur listened, profoundly moved. He opened his tool satchel right there on the bakery counter. With practiced, delicate precision inherited from Clara, he carefully opened the casing, cleaned the gears, and installed a brand-new mainspring. He wound the tiny crown, and a cheerful, rhythmic ticking filled the quiet bakery. He handed it back to Eleanor. "Time is moving forward again," he smiled. Eleanor wept openly, pressing the ticking watch to her heart. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a strange, intricately shaped piece of brass. "Before Clara disappeared," Eleanor said, "she visited me. She gave me this piece of metal and told me that one day you would bring me a ticking watch. She said when you did, I must give this to you." Arthur examined the brass piece. It looked like a fragment of a larger key. He thanked Eleanor deeply and stepped back out into the cold, feeling a strange new warmth glowing in his chest. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like the video. It helps these stories reach more people who need a little inspiration today. Arthur's next stop was the village schoolhouse, where the strict and notoriously unforgiving schoolteacher Thomas presided. Thomas was a man of rigid schedules, sharp rulers, and a permanent scowl. Arthur cautiously approached the empty classroom. Thomas was sitting at his large oak desk, grading papers with a heavy red pen. "Mr. Thomas?" Arthur said hesitantly. The older man looked up, his expression softening just a fraction upon seeing the boy. "Arthur, I was terribly sorry to hear about Clara. She was a remarkable woman." Arthur walked to the desk and placed the second broken watch down on the wood. "She left this for you." Thomas dropped his red pen. His rigid posture seemed to collapse all at once. He picked up the watch as if it were made of fragile glass. "She kept it," he murmured, his voice cracking. He looked at Arthur, his strict facade melting away to reveal a deeply sorrowful man. "Do you know what pride costs, Arthur? It costs you the people you love." Thomas sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair. 10 years ago, my younger brother and I had a terrible argument over our father's estate. Terrible, hateful words were spoken. I swore I would never speak to him again. I walked away and slammed the door. The very next day, Clara called me into her shop. She handed me this watch. It was completely frozen. Thomas traced the cracked glass of the watch face. She looked at me with those piercing eyes of hers and said, "Thomas, anger is a thief that steals your seconds, your minutes, and your years. You think you are punishing him by stopping the clock on your relationship, but you are only robbing yourself." I was too stubborn to listen. I threw the watch back at her and walked out. My brother died of a sudden illness 2 years later. I never got to say I was sorry. Arthur felt a profound ache in his heart for the lonely teacher. He didn't say a word. He simply reached out, took the watch, and opened the back panel. He meticulously realigned the balance wheel, a delicate procedure that required immense focus. After several minutes of breathless silence in the classroom, Arthur gently nudged the small gears. The watch sprang to life, ticking steadily. He handed it back to Thomas. "She wanted you to forgive yourself," Arthur said softly. "You can't rewind the clock, Mr. Thomas, but you can make sure the time you have left is used for kindness." Tears freely rolled down the strict teacher's face. He nodded, unable to speak, and opened his desk drawer. He pulled out a second piece of brass, perfectly shaped to interlock with the one Eleanor had given Arthur. "She told me you would come," Thomas whispered. "Thank you, Arthur." "Thank you." Arthur left the schoolhouse with a racing heart. He snapped the two brass pieces together. They formed the shaft and the teeth of a highly complex key. There was only one piece missing, the bow, the part you hold to turn it. He pulled out the third and final watch from his pocket. The tag read, "Mr. Abernathy." Mr. Abernathy was the village librarian, a man older than the ancient, dusty books he fiercely protected. His library was a labyrinth of towering shelves and winding corridors. Arthur found the old man sitting in a leather wing-back chair near a crackling fireplace, reading through thick spectacles. "Ah, young Arthur," Mr. Abernathy smiled, closing his book. "I have been expecting you. Pull up a chair. Let us look at that final watch." Arthur handed over the watch. Mr. Abernathy didn't look surprised. He simply held it in his palm, feeling its weight. "Your grandmother and I were dear friends for many, many years, Arthur. We shared a great love for history, for stories, and for the truth, even when it is difficult to bear." Arthur felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "Mr. Abernathy, why did she leave? Why the locked room?" The old librarian sighed, a long, weary sound. "Your grandmother was a master of fixing things, Arthur. But there was one thing she could not fix, her own heart. She had been diagnosed with a failing heart nearly a year ago. The doctors told her she did not have much time left. She was slowly fading." Arthur gasped, feeling the room spin. She was sick? Why didn't she tell me?" "Because she knew you would stop your own life to watch hers end," Mr. Abernathy explained gently. "She knew you would spend her final months enveloped in tragedy and sorrow. She refused to let her final gift to you be a memory of slow suffering. She wanted your final memories of her to be an adventure, a mystery, a lesson in living." "But the locked room," Arthur cried out, frustration and grief mixing in his voice. "How did she vanish?" "Ah," Mr. Abernathy chuckled softly, "the grand illusion. Clara always had a flair for the dramatic. That night she asked me to wait outside her window with a carriage. She had constructed a brilliant little mechanism using fishing wire and a weighted spring to slide the heavy bolt of her study door shut from the outside. The latch on the window was secured by a similar trick of tension and melting ice. Once outside, the evidence literally evaporated. She created an impossible room so you wouldn't focus on the fact that she was leaving, but rather on the puzzle she left behind." Arthur's mind raced, picturing his brilliant grandmother orchestrating her final masterpiece. "Where did you take her?" he whispered. I took her to the hospice house in the mountains, under the care of the sisters. She passed away exactly 3 days later, Arthur, peacefully in her sleep, looking out at the snow. Arthur covered his face with his hands, finally letting the dam break. He sobbed for the loss of his grandmother, for the secret she carried, and for the magnificent, stubborn, brilliant way she had chosen to say goodbye. Mr. Abernathy let him cry, placing a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. After a long while, the librarian handed back the third watch. "This watch isn't broken, Arthur. Look closely." Arthur wiped his eyes and looked at the silver timepiece. He turned it over. There was a tiny inscription on the back that he hadn't noticed before. It read, "For Arthur, my greatest masterpiece." "Press the winding crown," Mr. Abernathy instructed. Arthur pressed it. The back of the watch popped open. Inside was not a clockwork mechanism, but the third and final piece of the brass key. "She loved you more than life itself," Mr. Abernathy smiled warmly. "Go home, Arthur. Unlock the final truth." Arthur ran through the snowy streets, the bitter cold entirely forgotten. He burst through the front door of his silent home and hurried down the hallway to the towering grandfather clock. He took the 3 brass pieces and locked them together. They formed a perfect solid key. He looked at the face of the clock. Right in the center, hidden within the engraved flourishes of the brass dial, was a tiny keyhole he had never noticed in all his 17 years. With a trembling hand, Arthur inserted the key. He turned it clockwise. A loud, heavy clunk echoed from deep inside the wooden casing. Suddenly, the entire front panel of the grandfather clock swung open like a heavy vault door. Arthur gasped. Behind the pendulum was a large, hidden compartment. Inside sat a beautifully bound leather journal, a velvet pouch, and a sealed envelope with his name written on it. He reached out and opened the envelope first. "My brave Arthur," the letter read. "If you have opened this, you have spoken to Eleanor, Thomas, and my dear friend Abernathy. You have heard their stories. You have fixed their timepieces. I hope you now understand my final lesson. We are all clocks, Arthur. We are all winding down. But the measure of a good life is not in how long we tick, but in how we help others keep their time moving forward. I could not bear to let you watch me break down, so I gave you a mystery to solve instead, to force you out into the world, to remind you that you are part of a community. You are not alone. The journal in this compartment contains every schematic, every secret, and every design I have ever created. The shop is yours now. The village needs its clockmaker. Do not mourn the stopped clock, my boy. Wind it up, let it chime, and know that with every tick, my love is beating right alongside your own heart. Forever yours, Grandma Clara. Arthur held the letter to his chest, tears of profound gratitude washing away the last remnants of his grief. He wasn't abandoned. He was deeply, intricately loved. He reached into the compartment and pulled out the velvet pouch. Inside was a magnificent golden pocket watch, perfectly polished and ticking with a strong, steady rhythm. He carefully closed the secret vault door. He reached up to the frozen hands of the grandfather clock, gently adjusted them to the correct, current time, and gave the heavy brass pendulum a firm, loving push. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The deep, resonating heartbeat returned to the old house. It wasn't a sound of sorrow anymore. It was the sound of life continuing, of memories preserved, and of a future waiting to be built. Arthur smiled, feeling the warmth of the fire returning to the cold hallway. He was ready to begin. And that, my dear friends, is why we must never let the grief of the past stop the clocks of our future. Time is a gift, and how we choose to spend it, and who we help along the way, is the true masterpiece of our lives. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Nanny Granny's Golden Tales for more timeless tales and endless wisdom. And tell me in the comments, what lesson did you learn from today's story?